part of it, because in a way that is what makes you strong in terms of appreciating, what different perspectives actually mean. So having completed my studies, my work started very much in London, and I've been involved in that. And my very first job was with the then Race Relations Board, which was set up in '68 to look at uh, complaints of racial discrimination. And I began to investigate complaints, particularly against government departments. So that was quite a useful insight into how government operates, and how discrimination is faced, by people. And I became very interested in what are called systemic issues to do with race and racism, how institutions can operate in a way which can make people feel alienated and discriminated against. And at the young age, then I was then headhunted to become the director or the assistant director of the Runnymede Trust. Now, Runnymede Trust is a small organization which was formed actually in '68 in response to the famous speech made by Enoch Powell, when he predicted the rivers of blood speech. And Runnymede Trust was set up by some very enlightened people to promote education and counter the propaganda on all of that. So I was a sort of third director in '77, and that really was quite interesting because it meant that I became quite entrenched in policies to do with discrimination, inner cities, migration, nationality, and looking at all aspects of it, whether it was relations between the police and minority communities, whether it was multicultural education, it was policy to do with housing, so there's a broad range of things, how the media reported race stories and so on. But then I began to realize that to actually make an impact, I needed to mainstream myself because, there's a danger that if you work in a kind of just a race ish alone, you basically are still marginal. And therefore, to understand, so I knew that one needed organizational change. So I decided after about 7 years as director of Runnymede to join the Policy Studies Institute and do some research to see how change happens in institutions. So I looked at the whole area of how policy was changing in primary healthcare per se, but also after the uprisings in 1982, the Scarman report was done, how that was actually being implemented. So after 2 years there, I applied and through open competition became the first woman and a minority director of the National Council for Voluntary Organizations. Now that was what I call the mainstreaming of myself. And there again, you see, I've been very keen on community action, how you actually lead a mainstream organization and bring race as an integral part of their thinking. So it's not something which is outside. Now that was
Baroness,
in a way.
Baroness, if I could just come in there, because I feel like I should bring in a question, just to get a flavor of it. How was it really having this, what you would call an intersection, I think, or across, you had sort of this cross identity as a migrant, as a young woman, and also, so how was it sort of trying to break through what you would call a glass ceiling in this time compared to what we see today? How was that like?
Well, I think for me, people ask me that question often. I think one of the things which I would say to people, I never operated on being conscious of the fact that I was a woman or a minority. I mean, I focused on doing the job and having the confidence to do that. But I think what for me was good is that when I got that mainstream job, the number of responses and letters I got from people in the minority community, particularly women, to say, look, you've done it and it means that we can do it too. So I think the one thing I would say to you that, it's very important not to be too conscious of the fact, because you can actually develop almost like a victim mentality. I'm a woman, I'm a Black, and therefore, And of course, there are challenges. You have to break perceptions and so on. And sometimes you got to overlook how people treat you. You can either kind of react to it or you overlook it and say, it's either coming from prejudice or ignorance. And you just, don't really let that get you down. And then, of course, if you do the job properly, one thing leads to another. So I think having made that transition, the rest is sort of history in a way. Then I kind of decided to take some time off and had kind of a portfolio career. But in all the things I've done, I've never lost sight of And the fact that, to me, promoting equality, dealing with discrimination is an integral part of my whole being. And after sort of having had 5 years of portfolio career, the other breakthrough was when I became the first woman chairman of the parole board, which is really, again, another kind of, breaking the glass ceiling. And after that, I became the first civil service commissioner, which was actually recruitment into the civil service on merit. Now, that again was very much at the heart of establishment, a mainstream job. You know what I mean? It didn't really matter. I was a minority, and I was actually involved in recruiting, and interviewing senior civil servants. And along the course of that, I also served on the Royal Commission on Criminal Justice as well, because having done the work. And then I became the first inaugural chair of the Judicial Appointments Commission, which was actually, selecting judges. Again, the dimension there was to broaden the pool and make sure that we actually had more judges, from minority communities. And these were, tough issues. But the point was, it actually had to be done. And then, of course, I was made member of the Iraq Inquiry, which again was a mainstream. So in a way, I think what that illustrates is that, I managed to kind of get into some of the big establishment jobs, And after my parole board stint in 1999, I was made a peer, into the House of Lords. But I continued to do other things. And alongside, I also did a lot of work in the voluntary sector. Mm-hmm. Because I became chair of the Royal Commonwealth Society, I established, along with Sir Simon Hornby, the National Literacy Trust. So in a way, I think you could say that my motivation has always been to make a difference.
Yeah.
And therefore, I focused on that.
Mm-hmm.
And
I was going to say, Baroness, in terms of your motivation, I also wondered, what was the feeling of home in these moments? So looking at the journey, I've just plotted some dates. I guess it's, from Kenya to York to Leeds to Glasgow to London. What's that connection of home for you? And how did that influence sort of your journey?
Yeah, I mean, I think the connection of home is, during that process, you actually begin to see yourself as kind of a global citizen, I'll be honest, because Kenya was Africa, Indian heritage, connection with India, traveled a lot, and therefore, in a way, you feel that you are a global citizen. And I think it's very difficult to explain to people that to be a global citizen is actually very enlightening. People sort of say, and of course, I think you've got to be very sure of your identity of who you are. When I say to people that, one thing I want young people from minority backgrounds to say, have self-esteem, be very sure of who you are, because if you're rooted and grounded, that actually gives you the confidence. And I think that is something we've got to work on, because you've got to give people this sense of who you are, what your identity is, and yet be able to sort of navigate your way and glide from one culture to the other to be able to sort of actually deal with that. And I think that's quite enriching. As I said earlier, you can be part of a culture and yet stand outside it, Mm-hmm. And because you can stand outside it, you can see what's actually wrong. And I think that's probably has given me the strength to see what are the reforms needed in some of the British institutions. And I think the impact that you can have in terms of what changes are needed. Yeah. And of course, as you know, then I also went on to become the deputy chair of the British Council. And, I was actually projecting Britain to the world. But again, there I wanted to shift it, because to me, it's not just one way, it's now about mutuality. The world's changing. That's right. And therefore that interaction. And I think all my experience, led into developing, a very different, perspectives. And I think we've got to sort of highlight that. People tend to focus on, oh, this is how I did it, this is how I was discriminated against. The point is, you've got to kind of get over it, And
speaking about getting over it, speaking about getting over things.
Yeah, exactly. But the point is, you've just got to focus on what's important. You can either kind of wallow in self-pity, or you say, right, this is what I'm going to do. And the point really is to have good, strong networks of people that, you can actually talk to and support you. And I've been lucky that, I've actually created networks, where you can, where people have kind of supported you along the journey.
Mm-hmm. And ma'am, speaking of networks, what about the role of the diaspora where you've been? Have you always sort of looked for an Indian diaspora, a Kenyan diaspora? And I guess even in Leeds, people look for sort of a London-based kind of diaspora. What kind of role has diaspora played in sort of shaping your journey and 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 what you have relied on in terms of networks?
I mean, to me, of course, family is very important. And at the same time, yes, I think you tend to talk to people who have migrated, may that be from Kenya, from India, from Pakistan, from the Afro-Caribbean. I mean, having worked in race relations, you know what I mean? I interacted with diasporas across the board. And therefore, I'm not, if I may say so, very tribal in the sense of looking at it, Indian or whatever. To me, I see the common denominators, and therefore the interaction with different diasporas, is very important, because that even gives you different perspectives. And I also worked, with people who came to the UK as refugees. I mean, their issues are different, and people who migrate, for actually different reasons.
And speaking about, the work that you have done, looking at migrants and refugees, what's the what would be some of the key messages you would give to, let's say, a mother, and here I particularly want to draw on women, a mother who is hesitant for her daughter to take the journey out as a student to study anywhere in the world. As you have said, the world becomes our global village. What kind of word would you have as the kind of support that parents would give also to young students as they venture out?
They actually come to study, yes?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, this is very interesting, because I said I came to study at the age of 15 on my own. Fortunately, I had a brother here. But I remember people saying to my mother and father, what are you doing sending a young daughter? You know what I mean? But the point really is, it's having the confidence. And I think this really comes to the fact that if you have confidence in the way you brought up your children, and you've given them the right sort of values, and make sure there's the right sort of support, for them, I don't think one should be actually afraid of that, because, you've got to kind of let go. And I have to say, for me, coming away is probably, I blossomed, because it gave me the freedom to be who I am. And in fact, one of the best advice was given to me by my brother, who was a doctor, in Leeds, where I was studying. Unfortunately, he passed away was killed in a car crash at a young age. But I remember when I went to university, he said one thing to me. He said, look, now you're on your own, you have to learn to manage your own freedom. So in other words, it's basically the advice that you get: manage your own freedom, because we can actually restrict by giving people sort of, too much suffocation, don't do this, don't do that. It was to say, giving me the responsibility of saying, you've got to manage your own freedom.
And maybe a last word on sort of the role that not just maybe the diaspora, but we can talk about the entire system that represents that country in terms of supporting migrants who would move in this regular way, because we do know that others are moving in an irregular way. But what more can be done around that space to sort of encourage, I mean, here you are, you're participating politically into a country. So, to understand what kind of support can be given in your view.
Well, I just think that people have to be very clear, that migration is not always easy, and there are a lot of adjustments to be made, and adjustments are made on both sides. And therefore, as I said, to come back to saying, how far are you willing to compromise, and how far are you going to retain? And I remember used to use a sort of an expression, funny, you're reminding me of things I used to say and I've forgotten. I used to say to people that, there is something called inward and outward conformity. You know what I mean? Because outward conformity means that you've got to learn to play the system to be able to get on with it. But inwardly, you remain true to yourself.
Yes.
And I think these things are very important.
I like that. Thank you very much, Baroness Prasha. I think remaining true to yourself is the word that will remain also with me, because I think that it's very important as we understand what are the motivations and how people can remain, diligent. I think in understanding, what has motivated them to move, what kind of networks they could reach out to, and whatever support that they can get, despite the challenges that they would meet along the way. Thank you very much for sharing your experience here with us and your journey. And I'm sure there may be a moment that people may want to ask a few questions. So we will leave leave it for that.
Yeah.
And on that note, I would try to, I think Baroness put us on a note there to talk about staying true to yourself. And I think somebody who has stayed true to his mission and his vision as a journalist is Ishmael Enaishe. And he's an award-winning journalist and a writer who has covered migration, human rights, and international news. You may have seen his features in The Guardian, in the BBC News, Sunday Times, Foreign Policy. I could go on and on and on. And maybe you have also heard his voice on BBC Radio and Current Affairs, where he used to previously work. He's a senior journalist at a cross-border journalist project that's known as Lost in Europe. And this project really tries to investigate the disappearance of child migrants in Europe. And Eneashe he sits on an editorial board of the Tate, which is the magazine of the Tate Galleries in the UK. And his writing has been translated in over 8 languages, and he's a regular commentator on UK and international media. We have also had the privilege of having Ash here at the GRFDT Forum to just speak to us about some of the work that he has done in covering migration stories, and particularly looking at irregular migration coming from Africa into Europe. He has been awarded he was an African Alicia Patterson Foundation Fellow, where he reported on China's role in Africa, where he looked at Kenya, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Zambia. So even on the African continent, he covers a wide spectrum of issues. Most pronouncedly is that he has been nominated for the European Press Prize for 2020 in April, and he won the 2019 EU Migration Media Award. Nash, Ismail, I can talk on and on and on, but I think you should tell us your story. We just want to hear, who is Ismail and how did you get to where you are? So you can start with that.
Okay, thank you so much. That was a really kind and generous introduction. It's a great honor to come after Baroness Pasha, who's paved the way, and her incredible, inspiring career is so much to beholden, and I was really inspired listening to her, so thank you so much. Thank you, Paddy. Thank you for inviting me, and afternoon from London. So I was born in Somalia, in the north of Somalia, in a city called Hargeisa. And that's where I grew up. And at the time, Somalia was under a military dictatorship by General Said Barre. And the north, where I was from, which is now called Somaliland, there was a military uprising in the 1980s. I was born in 1985, but as I think just about as I was born is when the situation was getting really bad. And my parents were both politically engaged, and essentially that conflict in Somalia, which is still going on, started in the northwest, which was once a part of the British Empire. It was a British protectorate, and the south was what was called Italian Somaliland. So that's really where my story begins, and the conflict. Like many Somalis across the world today, our stories begin there, really. So we were the first region in Somalia to really have the outbreak of the civil war in late 80s, so from 88 onwards. And I grew up in a refugee camp when I was very young, like many people, because of the conflict. We had to flee. Then I spent the first early years of my life, I guess, in a state of, change and uncertainty, because there was conflict around. So I was very young. I mean, I was 4, 5, 6, 7. And eventually, because we had relatives in the UK, and because in those days it was more straightforward to come to the UK. This is, decades before the boats, and I'll come to that later, the kind of stories I now tell. But in those days, there used to at least be some limited shore but legal routes for refugees in this context in Somalia, but also you can think about what's happening with Kurdish refugees, or people in Congo, or people in Iraq, etc. People could come to the UK. So I came here when I was when I was 10, just before I turned 10, and I grew up in London, and I guess my experience is like a lot of people from Somalia who are British, but also people from other refugee migrant background. I grew up like in a part of the city that was very multicultural in Camden, in London, and it was a interesting experience. But I grew up in that environment.
But Ismail, how was it? How was it? Sort of having this perspective in terms of connection to home. I mean, knowing what the situation was like at home. What was your connection to home in your upbringing?
Right. That's an interesting question, and I think it's something that I've been trying to explore in my own way over the years. And I, when I came to the UK, I mean, I was, and I've written quite a bit about these sorts of experiences, but I was old enough to remember what happened in Somalia, and I lived through the war. So, I lost siblings and family members, and we lived through a conflict. And to have those experiences when you're young is, pretty, pretty scarring, and it does leave an imprint. So then coming to the UK was a complete shock because nobody prepared us. Because remember, I didn't speak English, and we'd never really been to school because the conflict was going on. So the situation was really different, and you see the ways in which people arrive in a new country really determines their experience there. And for refugees and asylum seekers, like from my family and people from similar backgrounds, if you're arriving in a country like the UK, the UK, I always say, and I've written about this before, Britain let us, was generous enough to give us space up to a point, but was quite indifferent to help people join in. So a lot of refugee communities were forgotten in the 90s in Britain, I think, and that was a disaster. And we saw the consequence of what happened in the 2000s. Effectively, you were taken from somewhere very different and then taken to Britain and then sort of forgotten. So that was one issue. Also in terms of the connection back home, I think, in my teenage years and into my 20s, I sort of, was trying to make a conscious effort just to get on and, go to university and study and so on. But it's, been later in my late 20s and now in my, early 30s that I am beginning to think about those questions and thinking about what that means and the idea of being in a diaspora, which you mentioned before, Paddy, and the Baroness was talking about as well.
Yeah, interesting to hear. And the diaspora, how was that? The world coming in and they coming in. Did you feel as though, what was your experience like with the diaspora that was already in the UK that your family tried to connect to?
Yeah, I mean, I think the situation for Somalis is interesting in the UK because they make up some of the oldest African migrants in the UK, because in the 19th century, there were seamen. They would, and they would work as merchant seamen, or they were freelancers effectively hired by the British, and they largely came from what's now called, Somaliland or British Somaliland. But they came in the 19th century and they settled in places like Cardiff and Liverpool, Docks area, and also in the East End of London. So there was a very old, small community. And then, of course, there's the other diaspora communities that exist from other places. But I think there definitely were, there was a welcome spirit at the beginning, arriving in the UK from other Somalis, because I think those days in the 90s, people were just trying to get to safety. People were trying to, find family, because a lot of people were stranded in various countries and camps, and families were broken up. You had, mothers and children being, broken up by conflict, and parents dying, and then the children becoming the responsibility of the extended family and so on. So this is what happened. It was a real era of change. But I think now I look back on it, and I'll come to, I've got a little presentation, Paddy, so I'll give it in a second. But when I come talk more about the work I do, covering migration as a journalist in Europe and in the Middle East and Africa, nowadays things have really changed in a sense that it's really difficult, for people to get safe, legal, access into Europe and seek asylum. And the majority of people who are seeking asylum, for example, or coming from conflict regions, are in the regions of conflict. They're not in the UK. And, we've had situations in the UK with Lord Dobbs and others that have been trying to champion the rights of child migrants, and, been really shocking how things have happened on that space. And, I think there's been a hardening of attitude. But the reality on the ground is very different. As a reporter who's going to Sicily, Italy, Greece, Spain, going to North Africa, East Africa, West Africa, reporting with migrants on the ground, the facts are that there's few come, and if they do make it, that there are very few. And the EU, Europe as a continent, is 500 million people in Europe, and a 19 trillion economy. The real crisis when it comes to refugees and and hosting them is in Lebanon, and it's in Turkey, it's in Ethiopia and Uganda. It's not in Britain, it's not in Germany, it's not in Italy necessarily. So I think this is one of the things I now contrast my experience, that in the 80s and the 90s, people could come through family reunification, people could go to an embassy in Nairobi or Addis Ababa and make a claim and then be flown out. Now it's impossible. So people have been forced to go across the Sahara and take dangerous journeys on boats or dinghies to Europe. You know, there's a reason why this is happening. It's not just it's come out from nowhere.
That's right. Burden sharing. I think this is the words that politicians try to use, or some even try to see. So Ishmael, maybe if you could take us through your presentation, can we give you about 5 minutes for that, so that we can have a chance to have a chat with you as well after?
Fantastic. Thank you, Paddy, so much. So if you're interested in hearing more about my work, there's the email and Twitter and website. And as I was mentioning, for the last, I've been working as a journalist for about a decade. I did a degree in politics at university, and then I worked for a member of parliament, and I then worked in human rights. And I didn't choose to, or I didn't rather set out to become a journalist. It sort of happened because I was doing research in migration, and I got a job at BBC many, many years ago, and I worked there for some years, and now I'm a freelancer covering this issue across Europe. So this is just a story from me that I did. I write these letters from Africa. Usually I'm not in Africa these days because I'm back in London, but these go on the BBC. And this is a piece that I did about what's happening to migrants at the moment. I just wanted to start here because I think reporting on this issue, the situation is really tough for people. People are stuck in ports, in camps, at transit points. Migrant rights have been eroded. And let's remember, many countries are using this opportunity of the pandemic to really put in harsh policies. So let's look at Austria, which obviously had that very tragic attacks recently. But in Austria, when the pandemic began, they effectively got rid of the right to claim asylum. I think the UNHCR said out of the 157 countries by April, which had some border closures or curfews or any border issues, 57 of those countries did not make an exception for those seeking asylum. So across the world, we're seeing migrants emerge as the most vulnerable group. And we also see the stigma and the fears from China to Italy. I'm working on a story from Italy at the moment. I just came back from Sicily, looking at what's happening then. To also telling stories of abuse and exploitation. This is part of Lost in Europe, which Paddy mentioned, is a cross-border journalism project in the EU, and this is one of our investigations that last year we revealed that dozens of children, Vietnamese children, were being missing from Dutch shelters, which are designed to protect them, and ending up in the UK to work in nail salons and to work also often on cannabis farms. So again, what we're seeing is that when it comes to reporting on migrants and covering these issues, we're seeing that there are these systems of exploitation and that there's a financial motive. And of course, the trafficking of Vietnamese children is been going on for decades, and also adults. And in the UK, the Vietnamese are the most trafficked group. And obviously, we saw the horrendous lorry last year in which 39 people, died. And what we're seeing is that the trafficking has got more extreme, the traffickers are taking more risks, and the UK has become this epicenter for drawing people in to work in our cannabis farms, in our nail salons. So again, it's important to remember that these systems of exploitations continue. Okay, I'm sorry. This is a story that I worked on for a very long time in Sicily. And so it's not just the negative things that are happening to migrants, but it's also positive things that are happening. So these are Bangladeshi shopkeepers who took on the Sicilian mafia in Palermo. And I spent 4 years working on this story. And this was in the Sunday Times. And these incredible shopkeepers had done something rare. In Palermo, which is the capital of Sicily, the largest island in the Mediterranean. They took on the mafia, who were intimidating them, forcing them to pay protection money. And it's interesting because people say Bangladeshis in Italy. Well, in Britain, there are a lot of Bangladeshis because of the colonial relationship. But actually, Italy is home to the second largest Bangladeshi community in Europe after the UK. There are estimates that up to 100,000 Bangladeshis live in Italy, and quite a lot of Bangladeshis actually come via Libya into Sicily. And a lot of these Bangladeshis also have a British connection because they've got relatives in the East End of London and what have you. And I found out that quite a few of them these Bangladeshi guys, were in the UK because in 2012, the UK government changed its immigration rules and made it very difficult for the curry visa, they called it, to bring people in from the subcontinent. So a lot of them had to get out and they ended up in Italy. So, and also exploitation continues. This is another investigation that we did, and we're continuing to look at what's happening because it's really worrying. And is that Nigerian women who are pregnant, in this case, have disappeared from Dutch shelters. These are heavily pregnant women, at 7, 8, 9 months. Some have given birth to their babies. A mother, to be or a new mother would want the best for her child. Yes. So clearly, the anecdotes suggest from the police, at least, that there is exploitation going on in terms of illegal adoption, even organ harvesting, which is increasing. I know it's happening between Libya and Italy, that young African migrants, young men, particularly from East Africa, are being tricked and ending up in situations where their organs, their kidneys are being harvested. So again, what we're seeing is at the borders of Europe, since the migrant crisis, these systems of exploitation continue. Okay. Also, this is another positive story that I wanted to also mention, is that migrants and refugees doing something about what's going on. And this is a really incredible story of a young refugee in Dadaab, the largest refugee camp in Kenya, who is fighting disinformation in this camp, and he's running a radio station. I did a story about him back in June. And also this other story that I wanted to pick up, which is just this, like amidst all the anti-migrant sentiments that are happening in Italy, the UK, to India, to Kenya, to wherever across the world, sadly, there's a lot of anti-migrant sentiments happening. But here we have a story of a young Gambian that was adopted. He's a Muslim, they're a Catholic family, and they adopted him. And the mother was very proud because she would show me around her kitchen when I met them for the story. And she would say, look, I've got cumin and chili powder. And, and she would say when Muhammad in the middle, when he fasts during Ramadan, his mother gets up in the morning to cook the meal for him, the pre-dawn meal that we have when you're fasting. So again, we see this situation, that we hear this constant negativity, but actually every day people are integrating, and beyond the headlines and the negativity in the media, people are meeting each other. And also just a couple of stories that I wanted to pick up in terms of the angle of looking at migration from the perspective of whose story it is, because often the media doesn't include migrant voices, it sidelines them. And this is an interesting example that I wrote about Lena Dunham, the famous American actress, and how she was asked to adapt a story about a Syrian refugee. And again, also the colonial histories. I think the Baroness mentioned this and her experience in Kenya. I think it's so important what is happening at the moment for us to not forget that these histories are not new, that these histories have been going on for a long time. And there was the piece that I wrote about this, which is, about exhibition, but actually it's about the histories of colonialism and violence and the histories of capitalism. Because let's not forget that Italy, which is a country I spend a lot of time in, which I love, Italy was once the colonial power in Somalia, and Italy was the colonial power in Eritrea and Ethiopia and Libya. And it's not an accident that these histories are connected, nor that the Italian company, has, financial interest in what happens in the Eastern Mediterranean and in Libya. So again, we have to remember these histories are connected. And there was a story that I just done on this Giorgio Marancola, who is a Somali-born Italian anti-Nazi fighter. He was killed at the age of 21 in 1945 by the withdrawing Nazi troops. His mother was Somali, his father was Italian soldier. Back in the days when Somalia was under Italian control, Somali women would often, be forced in situations in which they'd give birth to mixed children. But in this case, the father recognized the children, Giorgio and his sister, Isabella, but the mother was not able to come with them. You just remember the heartbreak, and this is, in the 1920s. And he gave his life, and there's a really, incredible quote in which he says, homeland, means dignity and sacrifice, and freedom for the peoples of the world. This is why I fight the oppressors. And he was killed by Nazi troops. And now a metro station is going to be named after him in Rome. So again, it's how we erase people and people's histories and we forget them. And final two slides that I want to come to, and I picked this up a little bit at the beginning, is that, for me, I love this beat as a reporter covering migration. I've chosen to report on this. Sometimes I hear people saying, well, it's only the boat, it's only people coming from Libya or from North Africa into Europe. It's not, it's a global story. It's, as a reporter, covering migration means I can tell stories about the economy, about health, about the environment, and also from the cultural perspective. And finally, just, because you asked me to think about this, Paddy, on the email you sent, but, I also write about my own experiences, and this is a long read I wrote in The Guardian some years ago, and the ideas of being a citizen. And, this was about 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, in The Guardian as a long read. And, now we've had this conversation about Shamima Begum, and all the young Muslims and others who have joined ISIS or alleged to have joined it, etc. And now they want to come back to Britain or and their citizenship has been revoked. So this was before all of that, really. But the idea is really to think about what it means to be British today. And I, for me, somebody who has naturalized, and around the time that I naturalized, I was 18. And before then, you just get a British passport. It wasn't like, enormous thing. But then after 2000, it changed and it became citizenship ceremonies and it became about shared values. And so really this is, for me, it's also on a very personal level about, what it means to be a Muslim in Britain and what it means to be somebody of a, Black African descent living in Britain today. And, also especially in the light of everything that's happening, even right now with the situation in the United States, that these questions are really important. I'm sure we'll pick up in the conversation, but I'll stop there. Thank you.
Ishmael, thank you for sharing your story. Like I have told you, I think we can spend days with you. We need a whole seminar because I think, like I had said to you when we had asked you to come on, we wanted you to walk us through walking with a migrant. And I think you've taken us through not just one migrant, but different types of journeys, good and bad stories, and good and less positive stories, so to say. But I think I also like your take on sort of saying, why you do it, and the idea is also to make sure that the information is out there, not just as stories, but that kind of information goes out to people who are around the room here, like policymakers, who can who have it in their powers and in their hands to do something about it, about particularly a lot of the negative coverage the coverage of the negative realities, let me put it that way. So I think also, without much further ado, we are probably also in time for me to introduce our next I would call it the Migrant Achiever Organization, because when I stumbled upon this story some years ago, and sort of as part of research, it was a story about a young man who had gone out to work as a migrant worker on a tomato farm, and as he was out there, saw the kind of inhuman treatment that particularly young African migrants were subjected to on Italian tomato farms. And he decided to do something about it. Unfortunately, he's not here to join us, but the best part is that there is an organization that was formed by him, and Vincenzo would tell us a little bit more about it because he's the project manager of an organization known as NOCAP. And it's essentially, I like what they've put on their website. It's the story of activist Jan Sagnet, who is not here with us, and his International NOCAP Association for the Fight Against Illegal Hiring and Exploitation of Labor. Vincenzo Muratore, please take us through what you do at NOCAP. I know Van is not here with us, but I think you can tell us a bit more about what you do as a Migrant Achiever organization.
Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting us, and we're very proud to be here. And I would like also to thank all the people that talked before me. They were very inspiring, so thank you very much. I'm Cecilia, I came from Palermo, so with Ismail, we could talk about something, those teams for a long time. Anyway, I'm here to talk about something else. I prepared actually a small presentation, so if I can, I would like to share with you, so to be also a bit more fast.
Go ahead, Vincent.
All right, wait a moment, please. Is this one? Sure. Can you see that one?
Yes, we can.
All right, so what we have now. That's it. All right. So, well, this is our organization. It's called NOCAP. You can see here our email, and that's it. I want to introduce before just, as you've done, our organization. And above all, I would like to split my interpretation into three main parts. So I want to introduce before the history of Ivan Sagnet And that, of course, send to you all the greetings and all the thanks for this invitation. Then I would like to just speak a little bit about this phenomenon that is called caporalato in Italy. We are talking about exploitation, we are talking about new slavery, actually, and at the end, I would like to talk about no-carb. So he is Ivan Sagnier. He's a 35 years old guy that came in Italy in 2008. He came in Italy to attend the Polytechnic University in Turin, North Italy, to become engineering. After a while, in 2011, more or less, he has lost actually his scholarship. So he needed to find a proper job, continuing his study. So he decided to move from the north of Italy to the south of Italy in a small country, in a small city actually, called Nardo in Puglia, in the southeast of Italy. And he was working as a tomato picker. What was very strange that suddenly, after a while, he understood that something was very wrong. I will show you some picture because it's quite interesting to see that. These were the conditions in which the people were living. They were living in ghettos in Italy in this century. It was unbelievable. And they were completely exploited by an illegal organization. We can call them caporali. It's in English, it would be gangmaster, actually. And they were exploited working for 10, 12 hours per day for a salary that was very ridiculous. We are talking about 10, 15 euro per day. And working without any respect of their human rights, without access to the tap water or something else. So what he had done actually was just to decide to start a protest. It was one of the most famous protests in Italy. In 2011, we called the Nardo strike, and it was quite interesting because at the beginning he was completely alone, but he understood that he needed a community to fight together. And as he wrote, as he said, actually, the workers in that ghetto doesn't know their rights. They were completely ignorant about what was the law in Italy. They were mainly immigrants, of course, but the main problem was that they were completely not aware about their rights. So he started this big strike. It was a big protest. And for the first time, I remember that period perfectly. It was in 2011. And I remember that all the newspapers for the first time started to talk about the slavery in Italy. It was shocked for all of us. Mm-hmm. And we didn't know, really, we didn't know. And that one was the first main protest that we had. Above all, in the agricultural sector, that is one of the main sector where these illegal activities take place. And after that, of course, he started the big activities. He created a group, started creating no-carb as an organization. And after that, he wrote several books. And at the end, just one of the most important recognition he received, one of the most important awards in Italy. And that is a medal for his fight for this human right. What was very important is what is this exploitation? Because we didn't know in that period. And he started to understand that the main important thing was to put light into this dark side of our system. So we have at the moment, we have 1.3 million workers in this sector, in agricultural sector. And part of them are foreign. It's quite important because we are not talking about just about people coming from outside the EU. We're talking about also European Union citizens and also Italian citizens working in slavery, actually, in this very bad system. We are 430,000 exploited people that working mainly as a seasonal workers. And we can say that we have more or less, at the moment in Italy, 180,000 people we can consider as slaves. This is unbelievable. And we have 8 zones in Italy that we consider now as a high risk of caporalato. And that 60% of these modern slaves, we call them modern slaves, they don't have any access to the NHS or the tap water or the legal advising. And we are talking only of an illegal business in general that produce something like 4.8 billion euros per year. It's a very big business and market. What we have done actually working hard is, I will not say you all the work that was behind this, but actually finally in 2016, we achieved this main goal that was to have an approval from our local Italian government of the first anti-caporalato law. We know that also in the UK, we had in 2015 the first modern, anti-modern slavery act. And finally, in 2018, we have a directive from the European Union that condemned this kind of slavery all around Europe. It was shocking also to understand, because at the beginning, we were thinking that the problem was just in South Italy, After that, we discovered the problem was in North Italy. But studying deeply, we discovered, and we are discovering day by day, that the problem is all around Europe. We have the same situation in a different way in Spain, in France, also in Germany, in Belgium, and so on. And we are talking about, above all, well, for a big part, from people coming from outside the European Union, but a big part of that, they came from East European countries, such as Romanian or Bulgarian, that came here and tried to find a job, but they don't have any right. So the main goal, the main achievement was this law in Italy. But after that, we discovered that we should work in stricter collaboration. We should create a positive circle to help these people to change not only the legislative system, but also the economical, social, and probably cultural system. Because if you have slavery, it's not just an economical problem, it's not just a social problem, it's not just a cultural problem, it's a mix of all together these problems. So what we do actually, and what we continue to do, is activities of course, advocacy, so helping these people to know their right. This is the main goal. Research and analysis. We want to have data. We need data to better understand the situation. And we need this to continue our job. Then we provide also services such as transport, medical connection. The transport, look, is a very big problem, because the caporali, these gang masters, working mainly as a transport picker. So they bring these workers from the ghetto to the camp, to the farmers, to work as a tomato pickers. So offer them this transport service. It's very important, because we take off these people from the slavery, thanks also to this service. And then we have several projects going on. We have a project for women, about Italian women that live also and work in this condition. We have created also an app for the telephone, for our mobiles, to help these people to signal every single illegal act, and several projects in international cooperation. But one of the most important things is the last one. We have created a system, it's a kind of new ethic supply chain. This is one of the main points. Starting with a different approach, identifying the root cause. This is quite important, because we understood that the problem is that economically the supply chain is completely unfair. So the economical margin is taken just at the end of the supply chain. So mainly we are talking about the large-scale distribution that take just all the money that remain from all the process of selling. So our main point was to create a system that equally and in an ethic way could spread this economical margin to all the actors during all the supply chain. We have also created a certificate that is quite important. So we certify the product and all the company that want to take part to our system, if they, of course, permit us to control them. So they have, of course, to respect all the legislation about hiring legally these people, about, of course, producing in a correct way all the product that we want to sell. And we want also to have the right price at the end of the chain. We need to have the right price at the end of the chain, because this price allows us to help the workers at the beginning. And we have created also new ethic brands. It's called Yame, with no cap, as you can see in this picture. And of course, what we want is our final goal is to improve people's awareness about our topic. So we want the last customer understand that if they buy a tomato sauce, or just a tomato, or just fruit or vegetable, they are not just buying a good. They are buying a system. They are helping people to save their life. They are helping people who have their rights recognized. And this is, in our opinion, one of the most important things that we want to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
So, well, I think it's just, on the main point, I try to underline our system in general.
Vincenzo, I think thinking about, I don't think, with the presentation you've given, I don't think you can look at a can of tomatoes or any tomato product in Italy. And here where I'm sitting, we do get also a lot of Italian products. I don't think the experience becomes the same. And I think I like what you say about how it's a joint responsibility, right? When we set the right price, we are taking care of the migrant. And I think it's very important that the consumer is quite aware of it. And as a consumer, you sort of become an advocate in your own way when you purchase. And I think this is where the whole issue of fair trade has been going, that it just doesn't look at the trade aspect of things, but really who is paying the price when things are seen to be so cheap, So actually, the old way of saying cheap is expensive, it is expensive because it can be costing somebody else's life, somebody else is being denied their rights.
This is why they need slaves, actually, because if they have to maintain the low price to give you some offers, low-cost offers, they need, of course, to cut some costs in some way. And generally, in our distribution, our current economical system, the costs are cutting at the beginning of the chain, not at the end. So this is the main problem. We want to have and we want to achieve the right price, and we want to achieve not just in a small market, we want to achieve in a big market. We want to be, and we are starting to be, we are starting to finalize very big and important deals all around Italy. And we are starting actually to work also on a board. We've been in France and Belgium. We will arrive probably, and we hope so, also in the UK, because we want to achieve the big distribution, because we want to sell them our product, because we want to improve the people awareness. And this is, we think, the best way to help these people, to change the circle, to change the system in some way. I think we have lost our moderator at the same time.
I think we have lost our moderator.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Paddy?
Yeah, Paddy.
I think she's gone.
Yeah.
I guess just continue. It's so fascinating to listen to you.
We can continue. Well, thank you. If you have any question, well, actually, I was really fascinating also from your history. They were fantastic. So you spent also a lot of time in Sicily.
I have. I was just in, I was just in Sicily. I mean, I've been going for the last 5 years. And I do know of your organization and the work that he's been doing. And I think that's so interesting, coming back to this point about the systems of exploitation. And that, people in the UK, a large part of our tomatoes come from Italy. And actually, there was an investigation a few weeks ago in the Times about avocados in this context in Kenya. And something like, I think 40% of avocados in the UK come from Kenya. And these farms where they grow the avocados, women were being sexually abused and facing all kinds of horrible things happen to them. So I think the work you do is really very important. And people don't know enough about where their tomatoes, avocados come from. And they should know,
Yeah, well, I live also in the UK, so I know more or less how.
Oh, right, okay.
I live in London, so I know more or less.
Oh, right, we're all in London then. Okay, well, so you're familiar.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, some way. I think our idea was to enter this market, actually, the UK, but we are waiting for the
Hi,
Brexit.
Paddy. We lost you. You're back.
Yes, when the
back.
internet doesn't want to be your friend, apologies for that. But then I was going to say, okay, so maybe, I mean, thank you for that presentation. We had temporarily closed the chat because we had just wanted to make sure that we have a free flow process. As you noticed that we had 2 sessions running in the same.
Right.
So maybe I will ask if we had any of the participants from the room to give us a question. Just raise your hand, otherwise we will go ahead and be closing so that we can go to our next session. But I saw that Ishmael, I don't know if you had a question that you were already asking Vince there.
Yeah, we were just having a conversation. I think we were just.
We started a bit talking about that.
That is very good. So I'm glad you could, you could sort of take over the show. And I just quickly tried to check in our chat. I don't think we had any new questions coming up as at yet. And I had a long list of questions, but we're also running out of time. And I know that, you are all absolutely very busy people. So maybe just to say thank you very much to Baroness Prasha. Thank you very much to Ishmael. And thank you very much to Vince for joining us. And for us, I think it's very important for us to highlight the work of individuals and organizations as you have, because I think it gives a meaning to understand what we do in our work around research, because we want to feel that we are not sort of working in separate worlds. And like we say at the forum, that the worlds have to meet in a way, research has to meet with journalism, journalism meets with advocacy, advocacy meets with the political space, because all the worlds are interconnected. And if we are to make a difference in the lives of migrants, I think that there is not one sector that has to work on its own. We have a common a way of saying it: whole of society, whole of government, even though we have a different dimension to this. But I think essentially this is what it means: bringing the migrants together, but also making sure we're highlighting your personal stories, because they give inspiration to other people who may be a prospective migrant, are a migrant, are traveling along the journey or not, but can get inspiration from you. So we hope that we can have another opportunity to engage with you in a different setting, in a different forum. But thank you very much for your time, and we will end this session today. Thank you and have a good day.
And thank you
so
to
much.
you for moderating.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye-bye. And now,
Peggy,
Dr.
Professor
Sada, I think
Jain,
we hand over for the next session to
yes,
Professor
Professor
Kamenya.
Jain is a little bit struggling to enter, but Rakesh will work out.
Come in.
In case he will be late, we have to change the order. Maybe Professor Ravindra Ban.
Hello, I can hear
Sir, great to see you. Great to see you.
Okay,
you are
okay. Thank you.
I thought you may be struggling, but you are there.
Yes.
Nice to see you, sir. Please switch on your camera now. We'll have 1 hour session.
Camera count?
Sir, you switch on your camera now. Professor Ravindra Ban is also here. Hello, madam.
Hello.
Okay. Dr. Mahalingam is there. Professor Garciala. Sir, you have to do
Hello.
camera little down. Little bit down so that face will appear properly. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. This is perfect.
Okay.
Perfect, sir.
Thank you.
Okay. So now, Professor Camelia, you have to start.
So good morning and good evening, everyone. Good night for some people. I would like to welcome you to this farewell session of our conference in the name of the organizing committee. And of course, I'm almost becoming nostalgic after 4 days with you all here, colleagues from all over the world. We've had these 4 days dedicated to many topics of migration, the effects of pandemics, diaspora, forced migration. You can all check the YouTube recordings in case you could not participate in some of the parallel sessions. It has been a great way to explore the state of art of migration nowadays, taking the pulse of what other colleagues are studying and how migration is being experienced on the ground. It's also an excellent exercise of scientific diplomacy, I would say. It brings us together for a political reflection of how we can improve the lives of so many people, displaced people, vulnerable migrant workers. I would say in the end, migration is a way to measure the social health of our countries. And I shall not take more time from the session. I will start presenting our speakers, and I will start with Sadananda Sahu, Professor Sadananda Sahu. He has been our heart and soul all these days, bringing us together to such a wonderful experience. He is a sociologist, an assistant professor at the School of Interdisciplinary and Transdisciplinary Studies at the Indira Gandhi University. He is also coordinating the journal Migration and Diasporas, an interdisciplinary journal. He has completed several international projects on education, agriculture, and employment. He has many publications on diasporas and ethnic studies, international migration. So he's the founder convener at the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, and maybe that's why we are here today. So Professor Sahu, if you like to say a few words.
Thank you, Professor Camelia. And this is the beginning. I just think this is a kind of academic marathon, if we say. 4 days consistently and very, rigorously have done, and this is a time of reflection. So we really enjoyed the journey because so many people cooperated with us. And starting from, around, I think 70 countries participants were there, and more than 250 presentations. And besides that, we have so many, the who's who of migration and diaspora scholars, you can say. And I'll not take much time because this is just a welcoming. I really welcome all of you, Professor Ravindra Jain, who has been our mentor actually. And I recall when we started this GRFDT, we started in his room only, in JNU. He gave one room and the key. Now today we have made a long journey, and Professor Jain is there in Canada now. And again, he's so happy to join with us, and we are so blessed, sir, because you came here. And Professor Ravindra Ban, I requested her and she readily agreed. And she is the right person actually, again, after Professor Ravindra K. Jain, to talk about social policy, and very critically she can examine what we have done. So 4 days, I have many things to say, but the thing is, I want to summarize it that this is because of lots of cooperation it could happen. And what is the takeaway is we came to know each other from this part to Mexico, from almost 70 countries, people became, highly engaged, and lots of interdisciplinary debates were there. And the speakers cut across sections, in fact, academics, policy, we have politicians, all across, activists. So it is a large array. Even we have migrant achievers. We thought to include the people who are experiencing migration and let them share their stories. So this is a very, very enriching, and the concept also developed with input from many people, Sabri, Professor Camelia, William, Rola, Paddy, and so many, I'll not take name, Mahalingam will give extensive vote of thanks. But my point is, this is a evolving phenomenon, and maybe after pandemic, this may be the way of life for us, for academicians, to engage debate and discussion in this manner, where we can be more fruitful, we can connect with anybody in the world through this mechanism. And with these 4 days, our experience shows it is a very successful way we can go forward. And with limited resource, we can still make things happen. So without taking much time, I think I welcome everybody once again. After 4 days, you are still with us. I think you are still not tired, and 100+ people are there. So I'll conclude here. I welcome everybody once again.
Thank you, Sarah, for such a warm welcome. I will now introduce Patty Singya Knudsen. She's from Zambia. She holds a Master of Science in Financial Economics and a bachelor's degree in Development and Economics. She's a migration governance analyst, a development economist by profession with over 17 years of experience in various fields, including governance, regional integration, and specifically, she has been working on migration and public management as her preferred bundle of interest. She has worked for various international organizations such as the IOM and the European Union, supporting governments, regional organizations, and civil society organizations in various countries, such as China, Malaysia, Zambia, the Gambia, Tanzania, as well as in the East and Southern Africa. And she's, of course, a member of the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism Advisory Team, where she provides support on projects and initiatives related to migration and development, as well as diaspora engagement. And she's been working hard these days. I think you've seen her a lot. And thank you so much, Patty, for so much passion with this conference.
Professor Camelia, thank you very much. Dr. Sada, I have to say that I think it's very humbling to be asked to talk about the highlights of what's been 4 days of those who have been in the back room, a marathon. I think it's been a marathon in terms of information. It's been a marathon in terms of the speakers we have had. It's been a marathon also in terms of the inspiration we have drawn, you know, from the various speakers who have been here. And I'm just not talking about our guest speakers, but we're also talking about all the various researchers. I think, you know, each and every day we were running in and out of these rooms, and I thought about it and I said, technology is a great thing, because I think a lot of us would have lost a lot of weight in the organizing committee from running around physical rooms. So luckily we had to press buttons here and there. And that it also gave us time to really clock in, reflect, and think about where we would take some of this information forward. So also very happy to note that even as I give these highlights, they are basically highlights that I have drawn from my side, and maybe talking also a little bit with Dr. Sada, because we will be having a publication that will come out at the end of it that gives you some insights into each of these sessions. What can I say? I think the words that we have heard today in terms of breaking ceilings have been very important in each of the different rooms, whether we were talking about forced migration, whether we were talking about diaspora engagement, or whether we were talking about climate change, because there are some ceilings that we need to break if we are to move the agenda forward, in whether we're looking at international frameworks that various countries have signed up to in terms of the Global Compact for Migration, or we are looking at national policies that have been adopted to either it's countering trafficking or dealing with irregular migration, or would it be trying to understand gender and migration in that sense. So there've been some very interesting inputs that have come as part of these research papers over the last few days. And I think some of the resounding messages that come out is the need for a stronger global network of researchers and policymakers, as well as linking back to the grassroots workers, because there needs to be a string that takes the research recommendations, that takes all the inputs that researchers have spent. So for instance, in the last couple of months, some of the researchers have spent time interviewing people, talking to policymakers, talking to migrants themselves, talking to service providers of social protection systems, and trying to find out what is not working or what is working better. And these messages need to be drawn back into policy spaces, but they actually particularly need to be drawn back into where protection is provided, into where policies are put into practical measures. So that link between grassroots is important, as all these essential stakeholders, together with civil society organizations in their diverse form, as well as private sector, and not forgetting particularly the migrant representative organizations. The second, I think the second message that comes across is that we need more advocacy on social justice and safe and sustainable migration in order for us to integrate a large area of stakeholders, whether we're talking about academia, policy, migration actors who are working in the crafts. There was also some presentations that we had heard in other rooms that looked at mental health, for instance. So what is that nexus between health and migration? How are we really managing migrants that are returning from being stranded, some who have lost their jobs, some who have come back home in an involuntary way, and even those who are coming back voluntarily. How are systems back home integrating them back into society? How are we helping them with, in terms of providing psychosocial help and mental health support? So these are some of the highlights that we have had. I think that for us at the Global Forum, and I think that I could say the same for the other research institutions, and as well as the civil society organization, which is the Migrant Forum in Asia, and the Center of Research on North America. Here we can say that we've had a lot of takeaways. We're looking forward in us working in different directions. Hopefully we can work around things around migration and diaspora and digging a little bit deeper. We have been incised, we have been encouraged, I think, and inspired by music we have heard. We have been inspired also by listening to some of the crafts that some of the migrant achievers have shared with us. I think we have also been encouraged to understand that connection that you have between migration and development and business through some of the migrant achievers that we had. So we are yet to explore in which would be the best channel, which would be the right model for us to work in. And I think on this one, I think I would probably just end it here because we have a keynote address for this session. And please look forward to our publication that will come out, that will bring deeper insights into what the different sessions were about, and also zero in a little bit more on the highlights. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Patty. It was really enriching to hear such a good synthesis from you. And now I welcome Ravindra Jain. He's a professor of sociology at the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, India. He has taught at the University of Oxford and had several other research and teaching positions. He has been Emeritus Fellow at the University Grants Commission, National Fellow at the Indian Council of Social Science Research, Tagore National Fellow, and he was previously Chairman at the Indian National Confederation and Academy of Anthropologists, and received the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Indian Sociological Society. He's on the editorial boards of the journals South Asian Diaspora and Global Networks. His published works include South Indians on the Plantation Frontier in Malaya, Indian Communities Abroad, The Universe as Audience, Metaphor and Community Among the Jains of North India. And Professor Jain now lives in Canada. He's one of the mentors of the Global Forum, and I welcome him to give us his opinions about the conference.
Thank you so much, Camilla. Are you able to hear me? Are
Yes.
you able to hear me? Yes.
Yes, perfect.
Okay. I'm so grateful for giving me this opportunity to present the valedictory address of this very massive conference, a marathon effort. And I have called my presentation Alarms and Vision, the contemporary scenario for migration, development, and sustainable development. Now, I proceed by 3 progressively expanding steps. First of all, I present a case study of Indian economic migrants to the US with special reference to the H-1B visas and draw out its internal and external implications. Secondly, since all three terms of the theme of this conference, as exemplified by the case study, are set in an international framework, I further elaborate the World Summit's distinction between reactionary international, RI, and progressive international, PI. And in the third step, since the distinction in the second step is specifically within the framework of globalization, local versus global, there is philosophical, sociological, and historical need for transcending this dichotomy. This leads to a consideration of the planetary in addition to global. The planetary is premised on the terrestrial, on living in the Anthropocene, and the new climatic regime. Now, to have a few words of introduction going beyond statistics, it is obvious that the contemporary world as it exists has seen massive migratory movements. Confining myself to the continent of Asia, there are two significant migratory moves, those of the economic migrants and of refugees and asylum seekers. The former are a varied and socio-economically stratified lot, ranging from students, IT workers, and unskilled and semi-skilled contract laborers. Their points of departure and arrival may be conceptualized as the outgoing and incoming states. Thus, we have the outgoing states of South Asia, India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and peripherally Afghanistan and Myanmar, and the incoming states of the Middle East, Southeast Asia, Malaysia and Singapore, Europe, for example, Germany, and North America, for example, US and Canada. The distinction outgoing, incoming is not hard and fast one. For example, while overseas migrants from various regions of India have been traveling abroad, a number of Bangladeshi and Myanmar refugees have sought shelter in India, to speak nothing of the Tibetans. Among the incoming states of Europe and North America, there is a significant influx of economic migrants as well as of refugees and asylum seekers. I shall deal with a specific example of the economic migrants to USA, but let us note right away, in the context of migration, the large number of refugees from war-torn Middle East and South Asia, for example, Afghanistan into Germany and Canada. For instance, Canada claims to have given shelter to the maximum number of refugees, while in Germany, the immigrants from war-torn Asian countries have been termed guest workers. A recent exhibition of forced Islamic immigrants from war-torn Iran, Syria, Afghanistan, under the title Sanctuary, is being held at the Aga Khan Museum of Art and Culture in Toronto, where I am speaking from. Now, the case of the two H-1B visas for Indian economic migrants to USA. I have chosen the case of H-1B visas for Indian economic migrants to US for two main reasons. Firstly, they represent a class of highly qualified and well-paid economic migrants to the US, in contrast to the asylum seekers and the refugees. And two, even so, they are temporary workers and non-immigrant visa holders who are at an entry point and not yet fully into the settled migrant stream. The H-1B visa is an employment-based non-immigrant visa category of temporary workers. For such a visa, an employer must offer a job and apply for your H-1B visa, a petition with the US Immigration Department. This approved petition is a work permit which allows you to obtain a visa stamp and work in the US for that employer. The H-1B visa is issued for a specialty occupation, information technology, requires theoretical and practical application of body of specialized knowledge, and requires the visa holder to have at least a bachelor's degree or its equivalent. So this is a highly specialized, educated, I think I am contrasting this with refugees and asylum seekers. Now, even with this H-1B visa, during Trump presidency of the US, therefore, there was a burning illustration of the treatment that right-wing regimes in advanced capital societies mete out to the economic migrants. The H-1B visas were unceremoniously and tightly squeezed on the blatantly spurious grounds that A, they were taking away the jobs of qualified Americans, and B, that their unrestricted influx would skew the US demographic picture out of all proportion. Therefore, it was argued that H-1B visas be drastically reduced, suspended, or stopped, both in numbers and pay packets. Now, as the dynamics of the H-1B visa crisis unraveled, it became clear that racial and class factors operated crucially, both internally and externally. I'll not go into the internal dynamics of this very much, apart from saying that there was a stratification within the Indian immigrant group in the USA, those people who were well entrenched and into technical jobs with high pay packets, and those who were coming from India recently, and they were at a disadvantage. But the case study reveals the existence and exacerbation of a class structure among Asian Indians internally. Obviously, their ethnic identity is split vertically along the class structure. Further, this American phase of internal social stratification among Asian Indians is articulated, so to speak, externally with racial stratification in the US. This is revealed as we factor in the anti-immigration, non-Indian American voices. To cite the views of a moderate anti-immigration American lobbyist, Roy Beck, founder of Number USA, immigration numbers should be cut in half to help Americans already vulnerable and to meet environmental goals. Now, annual immigration should be set at a level that allows stabilization of US population and long-term sustainability of the American quality of life. This should be emphasized. To his credit, he also says, and I quote, immigrant bashing, xenophobia, nativism, and racism are unacceptable responses to immigration policy failures. Race and ethnicity should play no role in the debate and establishment of immigration policy. End of the quote. Unfortunately, these last sanguine words of Roy Beck sound almost like a bad self-fulfilling prophecy, for, as Seema Sirohi, a journalist, wrote in 2017, characterized the mood of extremist fringe, and she says, the 31 million strong Indian American community is at risk because to the bigots and racists, all brown-skinned people are job seekers, stealers, all Sikhs are Muslims, and all Muslims are potential terrorists. End of the quote. Sirohi gives several horrifying examples of anti-Indian racist slurs and attacks. Now I come to the second part, which is reactionary international and progressive international, that the so-called extremist fringe has been bolstered by the right-wing and populist policies of the US administration can be easily demonstrated. The extremist imbalance and asymmetry has been fully noticed and articulated at a global level. At the Progressive International 2020 Summit, intellectuals like Noam Chomsky, Naomi Klein, and Yanis Varoufakis laid out the threats posed by free market fundamentalism, climate catastrophe, and rising authoritarianism. Over 500,000 viewers from across the world logged in to be part of this summit. The lesson here seems to be that social and political movements challenging establishment must no longer remain isolated national episodes, that they need to reach out to other progressive movements in other geographies, pooling experiences and resources, confronting what Noam Chomsky calls the reactionary international with a truly international community of progressive collectives. The crisis they contend with, climate catastrophe, threat of war, and deteriorating democracy, are all international issues. The aim of the Progressive International is to build a shared vision of democracy, solidarity, and sustainability. Chomsky said Trump has continued his demolition of the arms control regime in his dedicated commitment to destroy the environment that sustains life. Trump has opened up vast new areas for drilling, including the last great nature reserves. His minions are systematically dismantling the regulatory system that somehow mitigates the destructive impact of fossil fuel use. Their policies being doubly murderous in the course of a severe respiratory epidemic. End of the quote. This is a quote from Chomsky, and he's taking into account the respiratory epidemic which is taking place, as well as the wider context in which policies have been formulated to destroy the environment. Chomsky talks about two radically opposed perspectives on the crisis confronting humanity today. The first is taking shape under the leadership of Trump's White House. Fortunately, I think we have a very liquid situation at the moment there. A reactionary international comprising the world's reactionary states. Besides the US, he mentions Brazil, Egypt, the Gulf dictatorships, Israel, Hungary, and India. Anyway, reactionary international that the Progressive International must pit itself against this reactionary international. Now, I come to the third part, the concluding part of my talk, which is the planetary or the terrestrial. In this, the third and last lap of my presentation, I move to a position that would be more encompassing than only international. As a preamble, let me state my own stand in 2016 in an essay published as Nation and Transnation in Diasporic Geopolitics. And I state there, whether we stress ecology or political economy or both, we must ground global theories in empirical instances while avoiding the pitfalls not only of methodological nationalism, but of insidious methodological internationalism as well. For transnationalist analysis to trump both methodological nationalism and internationalism, the human ecosystems, peoples and their environments, natural and man-made, as also the observers of these systems would have to be conceived as moving targets subject to the vagaries of geopolitics. End of the quote. As further thinking along these lines has proceeded, and one increasingly realizes that we are living in the Anthropocene, the philosophical discourse is framed holistically in terms of time, body, and nature. I'm afraid I'm going into a certain abstract formulation, but this abstract formulation is part of the planetary and the terrestrial thinking which is going on today. Holistically, in terms of time, body, and nature, to get back to empiricism, this is the very context in which we are living today, the COVID-19 pandemic. The body in status and movement is the locus, but then there are the great cycles of natural time, carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen. In India, we faced a crossing of catastrophe and crisis, cyclone, a locust invasion, a gas leak, and the epidemic. Instead of moving towards what Garrett Hardin calls ecolacy, the regime loosened environmental laws, making it easier for corporations to access the forest and the coastline. In ecolacy and other formulations to which I shall come in a moment, the idea of a social construct called human at the center of the universe is outdated. To refer just to the print media during the pandemic, it created a schizophrenic situation of newspapers discussing hobbies, leisure, and interests in colorful supplements, while the political pages reported the suffering of the migrants. In the overall holistic comprehension of the crisis, the modes of conventional social science thinking had little place for diversity and plurality. And this I come to the opening remarks by Professor Stephen Wertovec on diversity and super diversity. And as one of the Indian commentators, Shiv Vishwanathan, pointed out, and I quote, one lacked an epistemics of democracy based on a celebration of difference. To advance the general argument about deep interlinkages between time, body, and nature in the Anthropocene, an age in which every human activity has a consequence for the natural order, I refer to two seminal books, both published in 2020, Bruno Latour's Down to Earth, Politics in the New Climatic Regime, and Dipesh Chakravarty, The Climate of History in a Planetary Age. Bruno Latour points out the deficiencies and contradictions in modernity as a project. He reiterates the self-same diseases of modernity, as does the PI International Critique, the Progressive International Critique. Deregulation and globalization, rising inequalities, and denial of climate change. Rising inequalities, for instance, are manifest in current massive migratory movements, hence the nexus with diaspora. However, Latour focuses on climate change, which is the trigger for realizing the melding of nature and culture towards destabilization of the ecosystem of modernity. I have some time or not?
Sir, almost ending.
Okay, I'll finish in the next 5 minutes. Latour's book is a short but lucid effort towards making sense of the fundamental dilemmas derived from climate change. Nature is no longer an inert background from which resources are extracted for human activity. Rather, it has reclaimed its role as an active agent in the fate of the planet. For Latour, the basic conflict entails the opposition between the local and the global. The former implies a resistance anchored in a need for locality, comprising traditional outbursts of nationalism and xenophobia. On the contrary, the global, being the spearhead of modernity, embodies a planetary order based on an idea of an ever-expanding progress. Progress in this guise is a signifier of free markets, less governmental control, and vigorous technological innovation. According to Latour, this dichotomic tension created a political horizon for both the right and the left, which draw from the rhetoric of moving ahead or staying behind. Other alternatives were not contemplated, or they were just adapted to this dual model. Taking off from the dual attractors, local and global, but positing faith in a vigorous technological innovation, the geopolitical thinking leads through to a third attractor, namely out of this world. The dominant assumption here is the limitless existence of natural resources to be harnessed by mankind. It is this absurd assumption that qualifies to be called out of this world. This preaches a complete negation of the limits and pressures of reality. The tension between local and global views nature as a force that can be tamed and rationalized. Latour asks the next question, then what can be done? Are we tied to an inevitable climatic catastrophe? He suggests another attractor, one which actualizes the politico-philosophical dilemmas of our current age, and that could bring them to particular actions. He calls this the terrestrial, for it follows the idea that humans do not comprise the center of the nature anymore. Rather, we are in constant interaction with other beings and natural phenomena. Hence, the new climatic regime demands a focus on geosocial. Each human activity has to be considered along with the impact it will have on the planet. For Latour, the new climate regime requires a new set of values and meanings upon which the societies of the future must be built. In other words, before coming up with more nuanced and harmonious ideals of progress, we need to imagine a better earth. Now I come to the last part, which is a critique of Latour's and Dipesh Chakravarti's thing, because they do provide a strong point of reference for continuing efforts against climate change. The challenge is how to transport this repertoire of values and meanings to concrete policies. The need for change is obvious, but its application remains obscure. For Latour, this is an opportunity to overcome the division between right and left. Nevertheless, it is difficult to imagine a full embrace of a political ecology across the whole ideological spectrum. This difficulty is key to reflecting on the possibilities of changing a global order grounded in an unequal distribution of power and economic and natural resources. Latour's claim of recognizing ourselves as terrestrials summarizes the current urgency of achieving emancipation through an integral framework which takes into account multiple voices and the new evident dependency of human societies upon nature. But a Western, mainly European standpoint is not enough. We have Africans, we have Chinese, we have Indians, we have Latin Americans. Maintaining a horizontal relationship with nature has been the core belief of many cosmologies of indigenous people across the planet. And the non-European classical cosmologies of India, Japan, and China are no exception. I would end here. The points and issues that I have raised are already tackled in the many papers that are presented in this conference. My message in the end is to put these deliberations into the widest planetary perspective. I have started with the lowest denominator, the B1 for visas, HB1B visas in the United States for the highly qualified people. Then I came to the international movements which are going on. And then I come to the planetary, which in a sense transcends the international methodological limitations. So my the full drama of society, nature, and human migration in the Anthropocene is depicted, for example, in Amitav Ghosh's novel, Gun Island, for instance. So I think the whole perspective of migration, diaspora, and sustainable development has to be seen, in my view, in these three layered micro, meso to macro perspectives, which may be called the existential down to earth perspective of the B1 H1B visas, the international movements which are taking place, and the planetary thinking which is going ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Jain. And I will now give the word to Ravinder Barn. She's a professor of sociology in the Department of Law and Criminology. She's the author and editor of 8 books and over 100 journal papers or book chapters. Ravinder writes on gender, ethnicity, child and youth welfare, and criminal justice. Her research on child welfare and migrant groups is highly regarded nationally and internationally. Ravinder's empirical work on sexual violence and the judiciary in India has been among the top 10 most read papers in the British Journal of Criminology. She is a mixed method researcher. Her academic base is interdisciplinary and spans social policy, sociology, social work, and criminology. Please, ma'am, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Camelia. Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes, perfect. We can hear.
Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings from England. I am deeply honored to be speaking at this important conference on the theme of migration, diasporas, and sustainable development. And I feel privileged to be given this platform to share my thoughts on an issue of significant global importance. And I'd like to thank Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, Migrant Forum in Asia, Manila in the Philippines, but also the Center for Research in North America, the National Autonomous University of Mexico, for this very kind invitation. I should say that this week has been a good week in one sense to be at this conference because it is reading week at my university, and it's reading week at many other universities across England. So although during a normal academic week, I would be quite busy with teaching commitments and so on, this week has been free of teaching. So of course, that has meant that for the last several days, I've been dipping in and out of conference sessions, and that's been absolutely wonderful. I was able to attend the inaugural session, and I've been to several other sessions over the last several days to listen to some very excellent presentations on a range of topics. And I have to say that although I've been researching migration, diasporas, migrant communities in the UK and abroad for the last 3 decades now, I've learned so much in the last few days from being able to attend this international e-conference. So thank you. And of course, there've been a tremendous range of papers on a key range of topics, as Paddy has already told us, from distressed migration and displacement, the impact of climate change. There was an excellent session just today on that, and previously too, forced migration, international trafficking and forced labor, global compact for migration, diaspora and development. You know, the kind of range of areas has been just so vast and absolutely fabulous. And of course, the impact of diasporas on foreign policies, but the impact of diasporas on home politics and home policies too is a topic of great study. And of course also, diaspora organizations, civil society, human rights, international return migration, which has been again discussed quite a bit at this conference. And we've heard also quite a lot, also in the kind of context of COVID-19, I think, the diaspora engagement with the home country, including a focus on remittances, but the drastic reduction in remittances since the onset of this pandemic. So an extremely rich exchange of ideas, deep insights into key issues and concerns around social and economic inequalities, climate change, how these are impacting our world today, the processes which lead to displacement, migration, and of course the impact on the sending countries, but also the receiving countries and the migrants themselves. And of course, within these themes, as a scholar, I would say that theories, sociological theories, social sciences theories, the sorts of things that we've heard from Professor Jain, for instance, the kind of work that he has drawn on is really, really important. So theories of marginality, intersectionality, super diversity, identity and belonging, integration, segmented assimilation in the way that, again, Professor Jain has alluded to, gender perspectives, have all been importantly and I think very crucially embedded in many of the papers that we have had at this conference. And of course, on Monday in his keynote, Professor Steven Vertevec stressed the need to understand the complexity in diaspora and transnationalism research. And I'm sure that we will see the emergence of complexity theory in this field of work. Social scientists have, of late, I think, begun to draw on complexity theory. And I think Steven's kind of almost invitation to scholars working in this area to engage with complexity theory, to understand the complexity of diaspora and transnationalism and migration, I think is an important one. So I think we will see a spate of, I'm sure, research studies and academic papers to understand this very complex area. Professor Jain has done a very good job on discussing the rising tide of authoritarian, right-wing, anti-immigrant sentiment and its very real impact across the globe. So I will not actually visit that particular area, but I will say a few words about the COVID-19 pandemic and migrants. And of course, we could not have had a conference without examining the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on migrants and their families. And given the extent of internal migration within India, for instance, and the impact on migrants following the March 2020 lockdown and subsequent developments, I was not surprised to see so many papers from Indian scholars on this theme at this conference. I myself have been engaged in a study about the impact of COVID-19 on child well-being with an academic colleague in India. So collecting data online, etc., I was rather struck to hear school children in Punjab tell me about how distressing they found it to hear about the plight of migrant laborers stranded and destitute in a pandemic. And we know that it kind of went on for several weeks, that plight that these children, these young people from this school were telling us about and how it made them feel. And of course, the impact of COVID-19 on migrant communities living overseas has also been quite severe. And I'm just going to talk about the UK very briefly. Here in the UK, we've witnessed a high death toll among people from a Black and ethnic minority background community. a combination of underlying health conditions coupled with poverty, poor housing, frontline occupational jobs, family structure, have all contributed to this dire situation. And a report by Public Health England in August this year found, and I quote, "An analysis of survival among confirmed COVID-19 cases and using more detailed ethnic groups shows that after accounting for the effect of age, sex, deprivation, and region, people of Bangladeshi ethnicity had around twice the risk of death than people of white British ethnicity. People of Chinese, Indian, Pakistani, other Asian, Black Caribbean, and other Black ethnicity had between 10 and 50% higher risk of death when compared to white British." So indeed, the use of complexity theory, just to go back to that, to understand this phenomena could be an extremely useful exercise. And we have research projects currently underway in this country that are beginning to look at this situation that is taking place. And we're also, of course, aware of the impact of COVID-19 on migrating Indian students, many of whom returned to India with an enormous negative impact on their studies, on financial situation, and digital technology has not helped to fill this void. So studying from back in India and then trying to sit exams back in the UK has not actually always been particularly great, I think, in helping these students. But of course, you know, life moves on and it has to move on, and we're all being told now that we have to live with this pandemic for the time being, at least. And in the UK and elsewhere, we've seen creative use of technology amongst diaspora groups. For example, online digital festivals to bring migrant communities together at a time of collective grief. Currently, as we speak, the Hindu diasporic communities across the globe are organizing online Diwali celebrations, for instance, to provide spaces for social connectivity, for relationality, and for a sense of belonging. And also digital clubs, digital book clubs have emerged with regular talks amongst the diasporic groups, drawing on large numbers of audiences, not just from within the UK. And I'm really here referring to some of the digital book clubs which are being hosted in the UK. But the audience have been from all corners of the world. You know, for instance, for some of these kind of diasporic clubs where the focus has been on Indian matters, you know, so it's drawn on the kind of 20 to 30 million Indians living overseas. So recently, for example, at one of these online events, I attended a talk by the journalist and historian Anita Anand on her book, The Patient Assassin, which is about the life of Udham Singh. And I should also add that the book charts the migrant journey of Udham Singh across 4 continents and more than 20 countries before he finally went on to kill General O'Dwyer for General O'Dwyer's role in the 1919 Jallianwala Bagh massacre in Amritsar under British colonial rule. And in a recent blog, 2 JNU PhD students, Harshvardhan and Prabal Agrawal, argue, and again I quote, that they say throughout much of his life, Udham Singh was not only a revolutionary, he was also a migrant worker. On the surface, his journey across 4 continents might make it seem rather like he was a romantic, globe-trotting revolutionary from a privileged class background, but they argue that at the base, his travels were actually driven by a struggle for a livelihood amidst colonial, class and caste oppression, because we know that he came from a very poor background, from a low caste background. And so this short excerpt, I think, speaks volumes about the ongoing migration patterns that we continue to see across the world and that we have heard about during this conference. And the settlement and integration, assimilation patterns of diasporic communities across the globe continue to be studied by scholars. But I think what this conference has stressed is the importance of an international perspective and the need to focus on these areas of research within a holistic international framework. The reality of climate change, its associated impact, has been an important topic, as I've already said, and the conference has done a great job in bringing together diverse topics. It's evident that diaspora and migration studies has really grown as an area of scholarly attention. And at times, I think it perhaps raises more questions than it answers, but I think that's fine. That's the nature of the kind of work that we do. But I think nevertheless, in a world which is seeing significant political change, and a world that is now marred by the COVID-19 pandemic, the study of diaspora, migration, transnationalism is, of course, increasing importance. And I think the conference has achieved its aims in bringing together key scholars from across the globe, studying diaspora and migration from an array of perspectives. And this is to be lauded as significant knowledge production, involving the very best of academic scholarship from the global north and the global south. And as a professor of social policy, two final things that I want to leave you with, the two final things I want to stress, are interdisciplinary research and impact. And I think those are two areas that we need to be thinking about more seriously than we currently do. Given the complexity within which we deal, one discipline on its own cannot hope to deliver a total package. So research which takes us out of our silos, I think, as someone said earlier today in one of the sessions, and encourages us to share our thinking, our knowledge, our perspective with others, is absolutely vital. So, for example, a study into sustainable cities could usefully engage scholars from a range of academic disciplines, including computer science, geography, sociology, psychology, etc. And of course, research that involves scholars from the global north and the global south is also crucial. An exchange of ideas and perspectives is a must. And regarding impact, the importance of collaboration with key stakeholders, for example, in civil society, state actors, is a necessity when we are working in an area like this. And such impact should translate into adequate policy, practice, provision. And I think scholarly research is important, but we must continue to strive to help translate our research for key stakeholders to help make a difference for the better. Because I think quite often as academics, we are perhaps either too modest or we're not particularly good at communicating our research messages for stakeholders who are actually at the cutting edge of policy decision making, or who are at the cutting edge of implementing those policies and who are working in practice. So that's what I want to leave you with rather. I end on that. And I hope that these few words have been of some use, and I'm absolutely really pleased to have been given this platform to share these few words with you. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much. It was really enriching to see your point of view and your comments on the COVID crisis and migration. And it's been really enriching. I would stay with you a couple of hours more, but we now have to go on with the program. And we have the closing remarks of Graciela Martinez Salce. She's the director of the Center for Research on North America. She has a bachelor degree in Spanish and Hispanic literature from UNAM. She has a master and doctorate in modern letters from the Ibero-American University in Mexico. She's a professor at the Philosophy and Letters College of Hispanic Letters, where she teaches several seminars on literature research. And she is also a professor at the Social and Political Sciences graduate department. So Graciela, could you please tell us your closing remarks? Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Camelia. I feel quite honored to have been invited to read some closing remarks. In the name of the Center for Research on North America from the National Autonomous University of Mexico, I express my congratulations to the organizing committee, the honorable speakers and attendants of this conference. Above all, I would like to thank the Global Forum for Diasporas and Transnationalism and the Migration Forum in Asia for inviting CISAN to participate in such a relevant conference on migration. I hope this event will continue as a long-term collaboration with CISAN and our network of North American researchers, REDAN, which I really invite you to join. Conferences based in the Global South that are mainly fed by speakers of countries of out-migration, such as Mexico, India, the Philippines, and Lebanon, will always be an enriching way to complement views provided by scholars in countries of immigration. This event has benefited with interventions in 5 languages with speakers from a great variety of countries from all over the world. An immigrant is always an emigrant for the place and family that he or she left behind at home. Migration is a phenomenon that has directly or indirectly touched most of the living populations of this world. During the last 4 days, I had the opportunity to listen to some of the panels in English and Spanish. This conference has proven that migration does not belong to any discipline and thus should not be seen from a monothematic point of view, as Ravinder just said. If I may, I should say that I have studied migration myself through film studies and narrative research, and documentary film has been my most important tool because it is a piece of cinema that deals with real events and situations where social actors of the real historic world participate, and the perspective that explains to the viewer the events depicted is determined by the filmmaker's point of view. One distinctive characteristic of most documentaries is that they forge a commitment to social issues. I will use a very brief example with El Contrato, a film from 2003, directed by Korean-Canadian documentary filmmaker Min-Suk Lee and produced by the National Film Board of Canada, which is a critical portrait of the Seasonal Agricultural Worker Program, SAUP, a partnership of governments and agro-industrial firms, its social consequences, and the integration problem it presents. And second, the importance of documentary cinema in making visible and analyzing the conditions of temporary workers in Canada. Even though the film was released so many years ago, with the COVID-19 crisis, we can see that their conditions are still our goal. As you might know, since 1966, Canada has been hosting temporary workers to labor in its fields, thanks to agreements first with certain Caribbean countries and starting in 1974 with Mexico. The government state that SAUP has its own norms to safeguard farm workers' fundamental rights. Existing norms stipulate eliminating from the program the farms that do not comply with the working conditions established in the contract. However, the documentary El Contrato paints a portrait of a situation in which the workers are exposed to exploitation and their health is endangered. And as I said, with COVID-19, several of the workers participating in the programs have not only gotten sick, but they have died. The way in which the film achieves its denunciation is by documenting the daily lives of the Mexicans, not only on the farm, but also at church, in the stores, and their houses, and their difficult, tough meetings with the Consul General, thus giving them a singularity, creating the representation of a community, and providing them with a human perspective, the one that is taken away from them by their employers and the Mexican authorities, who consider them numbers, disposable bodies, a replaceable workforce. El Contrato is successful in making its point. Life in the Ontarian agricultural region, the producer of tomatoes, is not willing to really include Mexican immigrants, but rather marginalizes them. This activist documentary, which I encourage you to see at the National Film Board webpage, lets us know that they have no possibility to integrate because El Contrato, the contract, is designed to forbid integration. The region that receives the workers is only temporarily transformed by their presence, so the program is successful in maintaining them as foreigners. Neither the possibility nor the willingness to change exists. At least, this is what some NGOs, academics, and filmmakers state. So, why do these workers return to Canada year after year? Because they have dreams for their children, because they hope for a better income, which does not always mean, as we can see, a better life. And because, as the documentary concludes, in this case, migration is a necessary evil that affects everyone and benefits in extremely different ways, both the workers and the employers, and also the governments, both in Mexico and Canada. In this sense, it is interesting to note that El Contrato has had several effects as an activist tool, and that is why I chose it as a very good example of other ways of approaching migration studies. In addition to making visible and denouncing the issues involved, the documentary gave migrant workers access and a place in the public discourse because relating their experience questions severely the behavior of farm owners and SAUP officials. But even more transcendental is the fact that it makes them members of the Canadian community that does not recognize them, that gives them their important place in the process that guarantees their access to foodstuffs, and that is willing to fight by their side for decent working conditions. It makes them part of a network, and being part of that network is the beginning of their integration. Finally, on the National Film Board digital platform, where the documentary is accessible for free from anywhere on the planet, a dialogue has opened up with the public in which anyone can participate, and I really invite you to do so. All manner of opinions can be read there about El Contrato. The fact is that the vast majority expressed indignation about SAUP temporary workers' conditions on the job. But since the National Film Board earmarks funds to disseminate its own point of view, both in Canada and the world, through the production of documentaries, this Mexican workers' viewpoint, preserved by Min-Suk Lee's committed lens, now form part of Canadian audiovisual history and of the Mexican migration to Canada. I shall stop here and send a warm farewell to the participants of this very particular conference. Thank you very much for inviting me to close it.
Thank you so much, Graciela. And we have now reached the end of this very interesting journey. Thank you so much for being with us. Please keep an eye on future events that we may organize, especially the Global Forum on Research for Research on Diaspora and Transnationalism, the Migrant Forum in Asia, and of course the Center for Research on North America. We have many events. And I will now give the final word to Mr. Mahalingam. Professor Mahalingam is currently the president of the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism. He is a research fellow with the Center for Policy Analysis in New Delhi, India, and a visiting faculty at the Faculty of Law, Jamia Millia Islamia, a Central University in New Delhi. And he has a PhD in sociology from the Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, with a thesis about Tamil diaspora, a case study of contemporary mobilization in Malaysia. He has published research articles, book reviews in the national, international journals, and online sources. So please, Dr. Mahalingam.
Yeah, thank you for this kind introduction, Professor Camelia. Dear esteemed dignitaries, respected guests, well-wishers, delegates, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Global Research Forum on Diaspora and Transnationalism, that is GRFDT, on my own behalf, I feel honored to propose the vote of thanks on this occasion. My sincere thanks to Professor R.K. Jain for an inspiring valedictory address. There were so many drive-home points. To cite an example, Sir is known for his methodological innovation. I really liked the way you understood, the way the methodological approach that you like to use to understand the contemporary migration around the globe. And also, I liked the way you try to weave this micro, meso, and also macro, this perspective to understand the contemporary migration is an interesting point to observe. And also the way you put it, methodological nationalism and methodological internationalism, how you can utilize to understand the transnationalism. That is very interesting points. Thank you indeed, Professor R.K. Jain, for joining us from Canada, where you are retreating. And thank you so much for once again. And also we look forward to your continued support with GRFDT. And a big thank you to Professor Ravinder Bond, University of London, for gracing us as chief guest and also giving chief guest address. Ma'am, really, it was an immaculate presentation. I really like the way you analyze the current impact of COVID-19 on migrants, and particularly the sociological perspective, and you called for interdisciplinary perspective or international perspective to understand migration, diaspora. Is very interesting to observe. Thank you so much for joining us, and also really we liked the way you summed up our conference, and we are grateful for your observation about our conference. I'm grateful to Professor Graciela Martinez Jalsi, Director CISON, for the closing remarks. Ma'am, really, you touched upon various aspects of migration, and also you just told us to watch the documentary on the migrant workers. Definitely, we look forward to watch it on National Board of Film Board of Canada. Thank you so much for joining and also giving your closing remarks. Please join me to thank Dr. Sadanand Sahu, convener of GRFDT, for welcoming the gathering on this occasion. Thank you, Dr. Sahu, sir. And I'll come back to you again. My thanks go to Ms. Paddy Sienga Kutsen for providing the highlights of this conference. You captured the important moments of the conference. Thanks, Ms. Paddy, for this. My special thanks to, now I'm just ending this session, and as president of GRFT, I want to acknowledge few people who really worked very hard to make this conference a great success. My thanks, may I record my appreciation and gratitude to Migrant Forum in Asia and Manila Philippines Center for Research on North America, CISON, UNAM, Mexico for their joint efforts. Really they pitched in and they helped us, to put things together. Today, we are really, this conference was successful because of you all. Thank you, your support, for extending your support in all possible ways and means. And my thanks are due to all the chairs of the session, the room coordinators, session coordinators, panelists, discussants, rapporteurs, for just, facing the time challenge and really have done a good job, excellent job. All conference rooms were controlled and there was a good discussion, and really there was a stimulating discussion on various topics. Thank you so much for joining us and making this conference a great success. I'd like to thank the organizing committee members, namely Dr. Guram Srinivas, Dr. Smita Tiwari, Dr. Amba Pandey, Dr. Kamala Devi, Dr. Munalal Gupta, Dr. Nabibita Chakravarti, Dr. Ruchi Singh, and Dr. Rahul Kumar, Ms. Kalyani Prachapati, Dr. Monica Bisranjan, Ms. Mosam, Mr. Nitish Narlolia, Rakesh Ranjan, Dr. Rakesh Ranjan, Dr. Divya Balan, Dr. Nandini Sen, and Mr. Abhishek Yadav for their extending support and also taking the responsibilities. They really executed very well whatever they were given to look upon. Thank you so much. You were really all worked very hard. And coming to Dr. Sahu, I have to speak a little bit about Dr. Sahu here. Hats off to Dr. Sahu. You really, I appreciate you for conceiving this conference and executing it well. It was well received, well attended, and it was well done. That's what I should say. But from the beginning, this conference was conceived by him, and he pushed it. Even the times of global pandemic, he did not, his script was not, he just went with this idea of organizing conference. I really, I don't know from where you get energy to do all this. Such a big conference, massive conference. You brought people from global north and global south. We have been deliberating, the past 4 days on migration and diaspora. Hats off to you, Dr. Sahu, and we also look up to you for, the future events. I think you are planning something, so let's, plan it together. Now, let us all put our hands together, to thank Dr. Sahu again and Dr. Rakesh Ranjan, okay, and also Dr. Feroz Khan, Dr. Feroz Khan. These three people, they managed all the sessions without any technical glitch. If there was a problem, they were there on the spot, they fixed it. See, this conference met all the variables of the international standards. I will tell you, as president, I've been observing this conference, just going into different rooms and observing the proceedings. Really, the papers and also the professionally it was executed. I should say this is the word I want to use it. And thank you, you guys. And also, I'm grateful to Mr. Sabrinath Nair, Ms. Paddy Siyango Kutsen, Professor Camilla Tigu, Mr. William Gois, and Raulat Hamati for making this conference a great success. You guys were amazing. You did an excellent job.
They should be even more because they mentored us.
Yeah, that's what.
They have mentored me.
And also bringing experts from every part of the world and having panel discussion. We sandwiched, the panel discussion, the migrant achievers, actually the migrant achievers, which added spice, light, color, glamour to this conference. I'm grateful to all the panelists, migrant achievers for joining this conference. So special thanks to all these guys. I think we can work together in future and we can organize one more global conference on different themes. So everything began well, it ended well.
I wonder if we could ask
but this
everyone
conference
to...
Madam want to say something.
Yeah, I will give a chance to Ravinder, ma'am. I saw her raising hand. I will just, I'll come to her. Yeah. Yeah.
No,
Ma'am, I'll come to you. Let me finish this.
I was just going to suggest that since we still have so many participants in the room, that we ask everyone to unmute themselves and thank all the organizers.
Yeah, I was planning to do that. I was planning to do at the end.
Brilliant.
I was planning to do at the end. Okay, so let me just complete before. See, an event like this will not be happen overnight. You know, the planning had gone into it. So our dedicated team, it was a collective effort. I agree. Okay, but I should again and again acknowledge three people here: Dr. Sadanand Sahu, Dr. Rakesh Ranjan, Dr. Feroz Khan, in making posters, sending it across, and just following people. I mean, I think they just work like anything. So big salute to you all, guys. I'm really grateful to you. Okay, and before I end, I want to say something. And see, this conference generated new perspectives, conflicting perspectives, and also as encompassing perspective. It brought out, the gray areas in migration diaspora studies. Many of you have really got some research topics as well from this conference. So we are very confident that you really have benefited from this conference. So I like to thank all the stakeholders for all your help. Thank you, guys. And as ma'am pointed out, I was just planning to do, please open your screen and just give a standing ovation, or you can put your hands together to these guys have really made this conference a great success. So thank you so much. And we are planning for other conference, one more conference. There is a meeting tomorrow to discuss the next future of events. So we will come up with something. So you look up our website and keep in touch with us. Stay safe and stay.
I want to mention
let us make a difference.
Dr. Amba Pandey, Dr. Nandini Sen.
I mentioned all. Dr.
No, I'm
Dr.
just
Amba Pandey, Dr. Divya Balan.
My supervisor is there, Professor Bhatt.
Of course, Professor Chandrasekhar Bhatt, Professor R.K. Jain, and Professor Kamala Ganesh, Dr. Vivek Kumar, Dr. Divya Balan, Dr. Ruchi Singh, Dr. Smita Tiwari, and also Dr. Amba Pandey and others, Dr. Monica Bisranjan, everybody, they pitched in, they supported us. Today, we are celebrating the success. Let's have a party together and have a good sleep also.
And it was like
we have to thank Professor Stephen Wartebek and Ambassador Swing.
Sir, that's what I mentioned. Everybody, all,
Well
thank
done.
you and all. I think
Thank
Professor
you very
Jain
much,
wants to say something.
It's a marvelous achievement.
Thank you.
Marvelous achievement.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much from Ireland.
Thank you,
It was a wonderful
Thank you so much from New York.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, William, too.
So much.
Thank you so much, sir. It was a pleasure being a part of this.
New York, be safe.
Even I wanted to say something. One participant who was infected with COVID-19 in my session, but he was very passionate to present his paper. So I salute him. We just gave him, come on, you take rest. Okay.
Well done.
Big thanks.
So thank you for your overwhelming support and also your interest. So we look forward to your continued engagement with GRFDT. Our journey is very, very short, but we are making a difference.
I don't know anybody from migration. Paddy, anything you want to say?
Yes, Miss Paddy, you played a major role. You want to say something? Come on.
I think I've spoken way too much in the last couple of days, and I cannot wait to do catching up of all the YouTube sessions that I missed. And also to just say thank you to all the,
our
angering
guests, our speakers.
No, huge thank you to you, Paddy. You're absolutely excellent. Greetings from New York.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much from Nigeria.
Thank you, Professor Kamlia, and also Sabari, all these people.
Hi, Khadija. How are you? I'm fine, thank you. Assalamu alaikum from New York. You're well?
Thank you from Istanbul.
Wa alaikum salam.
Thank you,